To better understand the Tunisian Revolution and how the country has progressed since 2011, I'm joined now by Dr. William Lawrence. He's a senior fellow at the Project on Middle East Democracy. Welcome back to the broadcast.
It's a pleasure.
It's hard to believe it's been 5 years since 26-year-old Mohamed Bouazizi, the Tunisian street vendor, actually set himself on fire and really launching the Arab Spring eventually. Tell us, has this area returned? Why is this area not really returned to a sense of optimism?
Well, there's a lot of reasons, but one is what the economists call a J-curve. After a revolution, things almost always get worse, whereas the population thinks they're going to get better. And all economic indicators will go down. Of course, unemployment got worse. A lot of the economic payoffs and social benefits people thought they would get from the revolution just didn't happen. And it was a long, slow recovery for Tunisia. And then, as your setup piece mentioned, they've had 3 devastating terrorist attacks this year. And that has left areas like Sidi Bouzid, where the Arab Spring began, not much better, and in some ways worse off than before the revolution.
The high-profile attacks, the Bardo Museum, and of course this luxury hotel in Sousse. ISIL's claim responsibility. Why so many people from Tunisia have joined ISIL? Why have they?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think the simplest way to say it is the networks were set up by the mid-2000s, and lots of Tunisians were going through Syria to fight in Iraq against the U.S. And those same networks were in place when the revolution happened, and those jihadist recruitment techniques continued. So there wasn't a major change from that regard. But Syria, after Tunisians had toppled the dictator in Tunisia, offered a chance to go fight another dictator. So thousands of Tunisians went to try to spread the benefits of revolution and getting rid of dictators. When they got there, many of them realized they were part of something they didn't want to be part of it at all. And hundreds have returned. Now, when these hundreds come back, when they manage to escape, because they leave ISIS at the threat of death, and some have been killed trying to escape. When they come back, many of them often fall into the same misery or conditions that propelled them to want to do a jihad, to leave Tunisia in the first place. And so Tunisia and all of the countries that are getting these return fighters back from ISIS need to think twice about just going after them as jihadis. Reinserting them socially and economically has to be done a little bit better, or there are going to be cycles of radicalization.
Do you think it's just going to take maybe a decade or so for the region, this area right here, to correct itself, for people to understand that some democratic principles have been in place? There are signs of optimism. People can openly pray now.
Yeah, I mean, some things are going to take a long time, and I think even more than a decade. As I mentioned, I think my first time on CCTV a couple of years ago, the best comparison to the Arab Spring was 1848, when one government flipped in Europe, and it took decades for all the monarchies of Europe to turn towards democracies. This is the type of thing we're going through in the Arab world. It's going to take a long time. Now, in terms of praying openly, on the one hand, the mosques have less of a government control of them now than they used to, but many of the mosques were radicalized. And so right after the second terrorist attack in July, Tunisia shut down 80 mosques as part of an effort to be tight, be much tougher on the jihadists. And that means praying freely is now in question again.
Mohamed Bouazizi, let's remember him today. Was his death in vain? This was an educated man who couldn't find a job, and here he was on the street trying to sell his produce, and he was forced to give in to corruption, and he said, "I've had enough."
Well, for himself, obviously, he's not alive, so it's tragic in that sense. And there had been self-immolations before him, and there were 400 self-immolations in the region after him. But none of the self-immolations had more of an impact than Bouazizi's. And he really did start a process which was ultimately, I think, good for Tunisia, ultimately will turn out to be good for the region, even though there's a lot of chaos in the region now. And certainly, Arab and Muslim populations have tasted freedom, have tasted democracy. The stakes have changed, and I think in that regard, he's considered a hero in Tunisia, and deservedly so.
Dr. William Lawrence, thank you. As always, we appreciate it.